Obviously, many people in our audience have questions and concerns about the Great Lakes. In short, what would you do as governor to safeguard the lakes?
So, number one, we've got to shut down Line 5. I mean, this is the kind of conversation we can't keep dilly-dallying about. And, as somebody who's worked in bureaucracy, the thing that folks do to kill a project is to study it to death. And so you've got these other folks proposing study groups and working groups. No, shut it down, and then let's figure out what we do on the back end. But right now, we've got a ticking time bomb. It's 15 years past when it was supposed to be shut down. We've had several scares in the last year alone. It's time to just get this right and to shut it down. But number two, we're watching as corporations have had their way with our Great Lakes for a very long time. And that's largely because under Republican leadership, we have disempowered the Department of Environmental Quality that is supposed to be the regulator in protecting our air and water. Under my leadership, we are proposing taking the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Natural Resources, building them together under one Department of the Environment, raising their funding from the $27 million that the DEQ gets right now to $950 million, giving them the capacity to investigate, the capacity to do research, and then ultimately pushing legislation that would give them the capacity to promulgate rules and protect our air and our water. One example of this, we've got Nestle Corporation, a Swiss corporation, that's bottling our fresh water. And let's be clear, all water is contiguous, whether it's in an aquifer or from the Great Lakes, bottling our fresh water for $400 a year, right, in unlimited capacities, while people in places like Detroit are getting their water shut off because they got to pay $400 a month. It's not right, and we've got to stand up for our water. And then lastly, we've watched as the federal government has made decisions about cutting really, really important sub-agencies that focus on the Great Lakes, and where they are going to let off, we're going to have to stand up, because let's be clear, the Great Lakes are 20% of the world's fresh water, 85% of North America's fresh water. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren, but also to the world to steward this resource.
If I may follow up on the question of Line 5, I heard you say you wanted to shut it down, but then what is the alternative for moving those fossil fuels to its destination?
Why do we need to be moving fossil fuels? Look, the capacity to harness renewable energy and to store it has never been greater. We have the opportunity in the Keweenaw Peninsula alone to generate huge amounts of wind energy, and we have the ability to leverage solar energy in a micro scale in pretty unique ways. I really believe that in Michigan we've got to move in this direction. We can be a leader in renewable energy for a lot of reasons, and the Pure Michigan Infrastructure Bank would be a means of being able to provide investments of really low interest loans for folks who want to build the means, the infrastructure of harvesting and storing renewable energies. And then we've got to push back on this lobbying that we've seen out of the fuel industry against net metering, which allows folks to harvest energy and sell it back into the grid. And then, look, we've got an opportunity because of our research and development capacities and because of our manufacturing capacities to be a leader in renewable energies nationwide and frankly worldwide. If we are serious about building really high quality jobs, if we're serious about building high quality infrastructure, and we're serious about the environment, I believe we can get to 100% renewable energy by 2030, and we can do it by making a targeted set of investments in renewable energy infrastructure, in a set of policies that force big polluters to carry the costs of their pollution, and in building the means of financing the kinds of investments that we need, both in terms of research and development through the industrial side, and also through the harvesting and storage of renewable energies on the individual side.
Okay, and Hassan has a question about industrial chemicals.
How exactly do you intend to combat water contamination by industrial chemicals like PFAS?
The only way that we get this right, really over the long term, is to prevent it from happening in the future, right? That's the most important thing. Cleaning up is very, very hard to do, and yes, we need to make those investments. But unless we get serious about standing up to these big corporate polluters who have had their way with our air and water, we're going to keep watching these things happen. My stepmom grew up in Gratiot County, Michigan, and her brother was affected by the PBB's poisoning in that part of the state because of Dow Chemical. And every year he has to go to the doctor and he has to get screened for the many different kinds of cancers that come because of that. Why did that happen? Because the state didn't take its responsibility toward regulation seriously. We are watching as Republicans are trying to strip away everything that the DEQ can do to even regulate in the first place. I mean, they are trying to replace the DEQ's regulatory capacity with a commission of CEOs of industry, right? We know what decisions they're going to make. I mean, right now, the DEQ is headed by a former oil executive at BP. And we watch as the decisions continue to get made. When I was at the health department, one of the most important things that we did was stood up to the DEQ and Marathon Petroleum when they wanted to raise their emissions of sulfur dioxide. And I couldn't believe that I, as a health director, was standing up and facing down a group of bureaucrats at the Department of Environmental Quality, having to explain to them why raising the amount of sulfur dioxide in the air wasn't a good thing in a city with threefold the probability of asthma hospitalizations as the state. We've got to stand up our DEQ again. And that's why I believe these robust investments in a DEQ that has the capacity to regulate, has the capacity to promulgate rules, has the capacity to actually regulate on big corporate polluters is critical. From there, one of the parts that we are going to have to get right is cleanup. But cleanup's really hard. Once you've put those kind of organic compounds into the world, they're really, really hard to put back in the bottle again. And so those investments are going to be things that we're going to have to keep fighting for. But until we get it right, not just on the cleanup, but on the prevention, we're going to keep watching these things happen. It's sad to me that as a state that is defined by its fresh water, we are the epicenter of water-related disasters, whether it's the Flint water crisis, whether it's water shutoffs in Detroit, or whether it's PFAS in the water in communities across the state. I mean, we got to get this right.
How exactly would you give the MEDQ and DEQ the authority to do the things it should be doing to protect the air?
So part of it is to build its budget out, right? So it right now at $27 million, it is one of the most poorly funded agencies in the state and one of the most poorly funded departments of its kind nationwide. I mean, we've got to invest in it again, right? We're just people doing the work. But part of it right now is that we're going to have to fight for legislation that allows it to promulgate rules, that allows it to actually say, look, the intent of the law is this, which means that the application of the law ought to look in these following ways. Because right now, it is kind of hamstrung. They're fighting the fight with one arm behind their back. And this is not to call out the civil servants who work at the DEQ, aside from the director of the DEQ. Those folks are there because they believe in the work, but they just haven't had the means to do the work, either because of the legislation on the ground or because they haven't had the funding that they needed. And so we've got to fight on both fights.